Jasilyn. Welcome to the virtual panel, Environmental Justice in Native American Communities, a conversation with Indigenous youth leaders. We are happy to host this event to celebrate Native American Heritage Month. This virtual event is hosted by PM Ready, a youth-driven platform providing resources to empower the next generation of project contributors and leaders. My name is Evelyn Chao, and I am the founder and president of PM Ready. No matter who you are and where you are from, I am so excited to have you join us for an intergenerational conversation. It is now my great honor to introduce our panelists, Leala Pourier. Leala Pourier is a youth activist. She was born and raised in Colorado. She is Oglala, Lakota, and Cheyenne River, and their family is from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. She has served as the lead youth mentor and director of programming for Strongholds Society, which promotes physical and mental health and healthy lifestyles for both Native and non-Native communities. Leala, welcome and thank you for accepting my invitation to share your journey with our audience today. Could you tell us something about the organization Earth Guardians? What is its mission and what are your roles in it?
Yes. So thank you, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Earth Guardians is an international organization that focuses on mobilizing youth in their communities to take steps forward to better the environment, to protect the environment. So we have these crews all over the world that do work within their communities, whether it be like beekeeping or planting trees, just to promote, climate justice as well as take care of the land that they're on. And because we recognize that justice, climate work always has to start at the grassroots level. And so we try to help support the younger generation in that endeavor.
Before we start the conversation, let's watch a short video about the Native American tribes for where our panelists came from. Leala, so you come from the Lakota Nation in South Dakota. So the first video is about what it's like to experience the natural landscapes of the Lakota Nation. It is 30 seconds. So
when you visit Oglala Lakota Nation, you hear a voice. She talks to you. She will feed your soul. She teaches you about the past. She will set your spirit free. Experience Oglala Lakota Nation, spirit of the land, spirit of the people.
Leala, how would you define the spirit of the land and spirit of the people? The title of the video.
So that's actually my voice in the the video as well. This is a campaign my dad created with our tribe, and there's just something, a lot of Native communities, specifically in North America, I mean all over the world, but I can only speak to North America, is a lot of Native communities live in poverty. But when you go to our land, there's just this beautiful, deeper feeling you get when you get there, because we've always been so connected to our land, even when we were pushed off of it, even when we had to make, our home in new lands. The Oglala Lakota were very nomadic tribes. We would follow our buffalo. And when traditionally, like, our ancestral home is the Black Hills in South Dakota, but we are also very tied to the Badlands, and especially now so that, our reservation has been there for years and years and years. And so we're raised with this idea instilled in us that we always have to take care of the land, that we honor the land, that the land is one of us. And so you can just feel that when you go there. You can just feel that deep connection to the land, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I felt it on any Native reservation I've ever gone to. And it's just, it's this idea that our spirits, our spirits are connected to the spirit of the land, that they're one of our relatives, the land.
That is beautiful. So the first question I have for our panelists today is, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and connection to your Indigenous community?
Yes. So I'm Oglala Lakota, which is one of the bands of the Lakota Nation, also known as the Lakota Sioux. So like up there on that map, yeah. So we're Great Plains, we're Plains Indians, or Plains natives, sorry. We call ourselves Indians, but we don't like it when other people call us that. Yeah. So we're Plains, and specifically, my family is from the Pine Ridge Reservation, in South Dakota. And so my dad was born and raised there, and he moved to Denver, and that's where he met my mom and had me. And but I still go there a lot. Every summer we have ceremony where we go back home. We have different ceremonies, but the main one is a Sundance, which is a 4-day time, or 4-day period of prayers and different ceremonies performed. And the interesting thing about the Lakota is where so Oglala Lakota means scatter their own. So as I was saying earlier, that we're a nomadic tribe. So we would move with the bison. And so really we called home a lot of different places, even here in Denver. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and it's very interesting because there's Colorado, specifically Denver, is just historically known as a meeting point for all these different tribes. Kind of like a trading post, long before we were colonized. That's where we would always meet up, was the Great Platte River, or the Platte River. I don't know if it's Great Platte, but so even being here in Denver, I still also feel that kind of connection, even though it's traditionally Cheyenne and Arapaho land. So we would always travel around a lot. And then as for my Cheyenne River background, that comes from my grandma's side. And unfortunately, we don't know a super lot about it, just because of how time works. And a lot of my more immediate ancestors on that side were subject to boarding schools and things like that. So we lost a lot of what we know about Cheyenne River, but I still like to claim it because it makes my grandma happy. And who I am. So I like to honor her that way.
That is really sweet. And so the next question is, so how does your community celebrate Native American Heritage Month?
Yeah. So we still, at least my family specifically, we do celebrate Thanksgiving. We don't really call it Thanksgiving. We make Indian tacos. It's just a day for like our families to get together and just eat and be together. But Native American Heritage Month is a very busy time for me. I also do social media and communications work. So, and all my clients are Native organizations or companies. So it's very much a busy time for us. And there's always events and different like powwows happening. For our community specifically, the first weekend of the month, we had a Indigenous art market. So we had different Indigenous peoples come, and they sold, jewelry, their pottery, just their artwork. And they all did really successful. And we also had different dance performers. We had the Apache crown dancers, the Pueblo dancers, and the Rocky Mountain dance, like powwow dance groups. And so that was just a really beautiful event because, not only did we have all these natives gathered in one area, it was also, a time for us to share and educate our community, to share like the greater community, the non-native community, especially because where the art market was, it was in Boulder, Colorado, which is a predominantly white community. So it was a really interesting time for these people to learn, to see what happens in our community. I mean, we even had a poetry reading as well. So it was very much, it was a beautiful, very busy, but a very beautiful weekend.
Mhm.
And then, we also I am so sorry. That was my dog.
It's okay.
You're sorry for that. I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
And, I mean, and another thing that we're doing this month, very near and dear to a lot of us, is supporting Palestinians and what's happening in Palestine. We have a very, our history, our pain has a lot of kinship with their history and pain in terms of forceful land removal, genocide, and things like that. And so today I actually was at a Palestine march this morning, and the organizers had all the Indigenous people march in the front, and there was jingle dress dancers, and there was a drum, and it was just kind of them, acknowledging our solidarity with them, and also acknowledging that, these protests are also happening on stolen land. They're also happening on occupied land.
Yeah.
And so it was just super powerful to see these two communities come together. We had an AIM, American Indian Movement elder, Glenn Morris. He spoke and he marched with us. And so there's a lot of different things that happen in Native American Heritage Month. There's a lot of different education, but we like to take this month to mobilize our community to do different things to educate and celebrate and stand in solidarity.
Yeah, I really admire all the connectivity and I guess all inclusivity and such.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the title of our panel today is Environmental Justice and Native American Communities. We have talked about a little bit about Native American communities. So now let's pause for a little bit and think about the term environmental justice. How would you understand the term?
So environmental justice is, for me, and for a lot of Native communities as well, is just this understanding that everybody has the right to healthy land, everybody has the right to clean water, everybody has a right to enjoy and experience this earth the way it was meant to be. And on top of that, there's also this obligation of protecting the earth. And unfortunately, with capitalism and colonialism and imperialism and all the isms, a lot of this is prohibited. A lot of it is blocked, and it targets environmental degradation, targets communities that brown and black communities, and they often, they feel the worst impacts of it and often get the least amount of rewards, reap the least amount of benefits. And so environmental justice is getting justice for not just these communities who have been polluted, have been dammed off, have their fishing rights, their hunting rights taken from them. It's not just it's not, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Not just justice for those communities, it's also justice for the earth itself. And keeping her safe, keeping her clean and protected, and so she can nourish. It's just a matter of recognizing that and then taking that step forward to get the justice that's needed.
I have the actual definition here, but simply put, environmental justice, according to this, basically means working towards creating a more just and equitable distribution of environmental benefits and burdens, promoting sustainability and fostering healthier living conditions for all. Do you think that kind of resonates with what you kind of described?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So moving on to the next question. How has your upbringing influenced your interest in environmental justice? what motivated you to become a youth leader in environmental justice projects within your community?
Yeah. So, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, just in terms of how Indigenous peoples are raised, and me specifically, my dad's Native, and he's where my Native ancestry is from, and we were always taught, that we're stewards of this land, we are owners, and that we need to take care of this land just as it was taken care of for 7 generations before us. We need to make sure it's taken care of for 7 generations after us. And so I kind of just I was always just grown up with this belief. It was so inherent to me that I didn't really think of environmental activism as a whole until I was 15, 16. Because it was always just something, that was just my life. That's just what I knew. And I went to a high school that did a lot of outdoors camping trips. So I spent more and more time outdoors. And also around that time was when Standing Rock happened. And just kind of seeing I always knew there was oil drills. I always knew that we were pushed onto desolate land for a reason, that environmental, that genocide of being pushed onto desolate land. I didn't really click until I was in high school that in of itself is also, a form of environmental racism, environmental, and how that in turn connects to environmental justice. And so just starting to notice these things more and more and making those connections after Standing Rock happened. And just, seeing those amazing water protectors chaining themselves to bulldozers and staying out there in the freezing cold, I guess that's kind of what radicalized me, you could say. And that's kind of what made me realize okay, there is so much more than I initially thought. And that yes, we know our belief, I know my belief of the land, and that's not necessarily something that everybody shares with me. So that is kind of what got me in the movement, was what was happening in Standing Rock, and that's when I joined Earth Guardians. So I've been involved with Earth Guardians since I was about 16 years old. Geez, that's almost 7 years now. And so and just from there, and learning more and more around the world, and just as you begin to learn more about these things, the more you obviously want to help contribute to your community to help do more. So that was a large part of it. And from there, it just kind of became, it was something I knew that I was meant to do, meant to fight for.
It's a calling.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. So I heard that the challenges or needs in your community motivated you to do something and take the initiative and make a difference. Speaking of challenges, I also found some research findings about the challenges Indigenous people are facing. So according to a 2021 article in Science, Indigenous nations across the US have lost nearly 99% of their historical land base over time. And it's not just the quality of land that matters, but the quality too. Tribes were displaced to areas that are now more exposed to a wide variety of climate change risks. And according to a 2020 article in Health Affairs, although climate change has an impact on all communities, Indigenous peoples are among the first and most severely affected. So, in your experience, what are some of the most pressing environmental challenges facing Indigenous communities today?
I mean, it really does vary community to community. I would say a few of the big ones right now are actually this picture is based in Navajo Nation. A lot of the Navajo Nation does not have running water. And they usually have to go somewhere to fill up their giant jugs and what do you call them? giant jugs and things like that. And so, and that's been a case for so long, and it's just now starting to get more attention on it, specifically around the time when the weather is more harsh, whether it be extreme heat or extreme cold, where it's a bit more trouble for these communities or for these families to go out and get water and bring it back. So that's a really large one. And water in and of itself is a big thing across all communities. There in like Standing Rock, and where the oil fields are, like back in North Dakota, it's very much the oil is threatening the water sources, and a lot of these tribes, that's their only water source. And so once that's ruined, that's when it's gone. And then they're in situations like the Navajo Nation where they don't have access to clean running water. And there's also, different fishing rights that people have issues with. I know a lot of tribes, or a few tribes in Las Vegas, they're still facing the repercussions of when they did, the practicing the atomic bomb testings and all their different bomb testings they like to do in the desert. A lot of these native tribes are still suffering from those effects, whether it be different illnesses that these young children are growing up with. And I think another one that a lot of people, it's something near and dear to my heart, and that a lot of people don't necessarily make the connection with, is missing and murdered Indigenous women. So a lot of missing and murdered Indigenous women, we have a lot, unfortunately. It is an epidemic, and a lot of them tend to occur around oil sites, because these oil camps, we call them man camps, are a lot of the times oil companies will always say, oh, we bring in jobs with our drills and our sites and everything. But in reality, a lot of them just ship in basically their employees. So these employees come in, usually men, to come in to work at the oil rig or the oil site, and they're not familiar with the community. It's usually in a desolate location, and it's usually near a large native population. And so that's when there's even a spike in, violent crime in general, like aggravated assault and drunken assault, things like that. But there's also a spike in missing Indigenous women who often, if they are found, had ended up being murdered. And so there's that inherent connection that I don't think a lot of people realize that happens, but also that just when you talk about environmental justice, you have to talk about all the intersections of it. And so that is a very big one that I think is affecting our community a lot, and that unfortunately a lot of people don't know that it can, it is connected to environmental justice because it's connected to oil drilling.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights. Let's just shift our discussion from environmental challenges facing the Native American communities to actions that have been taken. So you've already said a few examples, but could you describe one of the environmental justice projects you've been involved in, and what were the key goals and outcomes of this project?
I think, I guess that's considered a project. Sorry. In 2021, Earth Guardians sent a group of youth, mostly Indigenous youth, to COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. And that's where the Global Climate Conference is. And it moves places every year. And that year it happened to be in Scotland. And so there was, this big event going, or this big conference going on. You had different levels of clearance. The highest level was for, Biden and, these elected officials and things like that. And then there was smaller levels. But we were mostly there to participate in the stuff that wasn't explicitly associated with COP26. And it was like a people's movement that said, okay, like we're going to have our own conference going on concurrently to show, because this COP26 isn't talking about the things that it should be. So for example, I spoke at a rally about loss and damages that happen. It was called about loss and damages that occur because of climate change. And the main point of this rally was that there was a meeting happening with all the important world leaders about, important meeting happening in this building across the river from where we're having our rally. And on their agenda, they only had reserved like 15 to 30 minutes to talk about loss and damages.
Yeah.
And so, those loss and damages were all about infrastructure. They weren't about brown and Black people and their communities that are impacted. So we had this amazing rally, me and a few of my other people that came with me through Earth Guardians, Maya and Tony, they also spoke at this rally. Oh, and Marlo also spoke as well. And that was just one day. Every day we were doing stuff like that. I was on a panel with Indigenous with all these different people around the world. There was one from Argentina, Brazil, Kenya, and we just talked about the environmental challenges in our individual communities. And even though we're thousands of miles away from each other, they all were very, very similar. And so just being able to share a space like that with these amazing voices from all over the world is just such a beautiful, beautiful opportunity. And, we also, at one point, the organization, the NDN Collective, kind of had their own little setup somewhere in this building, and they would have nights where you just like go and make signs with them, and they like invite you to like make signs. So we learned, I was like spray painting everything, different things. And then later one night it was prepping for a specific rally for MMIW that we were going to have. So we were there till like midnight cutting out cardboard red dresses and things like that. So even just think like something as small as, again, like cutting out those red cardboard dresses for the MMIW rally is incredibly important to the project. And it's project managed, when you look at a project, it doesn't always have to be explicitly, you planning out the logistics. It's also, boots on the ground, hands-on, can be those things as well. And don't get me wrong, that trip had so many logistics on top of it. It took us months to plan, and even while we were there, everything was changing. And but it was those, boots on the ground moments that were the most impactful.
Wow. Your stories are very inspiring to me. I can see that collaboration and partnerships play an important role in your efforts to advance environmental justice causes. So do you have any tips in terms of fostering collaboration and engagement with other organizations that might not be very supportive of your project at the beginning?
Yeah, I think a big part, like collaboration is everything environmental movement, environmental justice causes. I mentioned it earlier, like there's intersections everywhere, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Indigenous environmental rights movement, even the Palestinian movement is, has environmental justice aspects to it as well. And so it's really, it's easy to find those people to collaborate with, but when you are trying to collaborate with someone who's maybe, not usually doing things like that, a really important thing is just to get that person inspired, is to get them in, because once you get them inspired, you get them invested, you get them, you have to spark that inspiration so they can find themselves within the cause that you're promoting so that they do want to support it. And of course, that can be easier said than done because, not everybody is as excited and committed to it as I am, as I'm talking about it and everything. But it really is just trying to make that human to human connection. And because everybody has a stake in environmental justice causes. Everybody does. And the only, a lot of Western countries, a lot of Western countries have this understanding that it is something that is very far away because the consequences of it aren't happening to us. Aren't happening, aren't really exactly happening in America in terms of, for like the richer people and like things like that. And it wasn't until like we had those big fires in California and Texas froze not that long ago, and like that's never happened before, and there were people almost like freezing to death. And so I think people are now starting to realize that this is a cause that everybody needs to be invested in. And so just trying to root people, get them, find a connection for them to get into this cause. And once you get that engagement, I honestly believe collaboration does become pretty easy after that. Not obviously there will be bumps in the road, because there always is when you work with people or large groups of people, different movements, but it definitely, once you engage those people, it sets a really healthy ground to start to nurture this collaboration.
Thank you for all the insightful advice. My last question is, how do you balance your responsibilities as a youth leader in environmental justice projects with your personal and educational commitments, and what goals do you set for yourself in 2024?
So of course I'm a young person, so I struggle with balancing my different commitments like we all do. And I think something that was helpful for me is that my personal life was with, kind of overlaps with these people who do want to plan these projects. And my educational goals, I just graduated in the spring with a degree in English and critical race and ethnic studies. And so that in turn helps my work with these environmental projects. And so it kind of all goes hand in hand. But that being said, there is, when it comes down to like time commitment specifically, like it doesn't matter if it goes hand in hand, that's still a set amount of time that I have to do things. And so just balancing that and knowing that, again, like it's okay if you can't always 100% commit to a project at that time. My last 2 quarters, so of my senior year, January to June, unfortunately, I did not do a lot of projects as I usually do, a lot of events and things like that, because I had to focus on my educational commitments. I had to graduate. So it's just acknowledging and knowing when, okay, like what takes priority in that moment. If you've only been doing classes and these projects and you feel yourself burning out and you haven't really seen your friends or your family in a while, then like, yeah, it's probably in that moment, it's time for you to prioritize your personal. And if you notice your grades are slipping, okay, it's time to prioritize your education. And it's just really important to be in tune with yourself, to know what you can and can't handle. And again, that comes from the rest and just, taking time to know yourself. And unfortunately, it's also a lot of trial and error. And for me, my goal is definitely stepping back into that world now that I'm graduated. I already have started. I definitely took like a month of just rest after I graduated. And being able to step back into those roles, that event planning, and taking to be just existing in those spaces more and planning in those spaces and using my voice is a big goal for me in 2024. That is kind of like what I want to focus on now that for now my educational commitments are done, unless I decide to apply to grad school, which is still up in the air. And so just, knowing what my heart and my soul needs right now, and that's being with my community, that's mobilizing my community, and also knowing that that might change, and it's okay if it does. It's okay to have to rebalance what's happening in your life. That doesn't make you any less committed to what your beliefs and your community and your project. It just means what you have to do for yourself, and that's not selfish. I mean, it's self-care.
Prioritize and self-care and really connect with yourself. I think is the main takeaways. So I love this discussion. I want to stop here and to ask the questions from the audience. So the first question from them is, how would we find reservations, chapter organizations, or just easier access to assisting Native Americans in their environmental justice effort?
I think a good, excuse me. I think a good place to start is, I mean, there's a bunch of different Indigenous organizations. I mentioned earlier the NDN Collective. There's Vision Maker Media, which does like Native documentaries in public media, and like, there's also like Indigenous Women's Network. Honor the Earth is a specifically environmental one, and once you start to plug into that, network of those organizations, you start to see the different fights that are happening. There's Stop, I think it's line 3. Stop Line 3. They might have moved on to another line. There's a bunch of different lines happening specifically in like Minnesota. NDN Collective right now is working on Stop Cop City, which is they're building like a whole compound, almost like college, to train police officers basically in Georgia.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a whole thing, and they're like cutting down a lot of forests to do it. And so again, that's another example of intersectionality, because it's led a lot by the Black activists in the area, and then also just acknowledging like this is horrible for racism, this is doing damage to the environment. And on top of that, even that has a tie to Palestine, because IDF soldiers train our police forces here in America. And so, sorry, that was a little tangent off there, but it's just, once you plug into those organizations, you'll be able to see the different fights that are happening. As for like finding reservations, there's reservations in almost every state, but it's so you could just like Google that, but it's also like, I wouldn't recommend just like walking onto a res and like handing stuff out, because that was, I wouldn't recommend that. Just because there's just, you don't want to come off as like a white savior or anything. But once you, it is important to know whose land you are on. And so that is honestly probably should be your first step, is whose land am I on? And then, there's chapter organizations everywhere. There's Earth Guardians chapters, places as well that you can tap into. And there's like the Indigenous Youth Council has different chapters, and it really is just kind of starting with that broader, bigger organizations, and then zooming in from there.
And the second question is, what are the major barriers in the Panelists environmental justice projects? How do they overcome challenges?
I mean, there's always going to be, that barrier of people who don't agree with your cause, who don't believe in climate change. I hope there's still not people like that anymore, but and so unfortunately with that type of barrier, sometimes you just have to like know, like, okay, if I can't change your mind, then I have to focus my energy elsewhere. I think a barrier that I hit for a while that I know a lot of young activists can agree to is not really being taken seriously or being more used as like, I don't want to say a prop because that's not really the word I want, but basically just being like, oh, the youth care about the environment, like that's the new thing now, and not necessarily like listening to the youth and
Yeah.
actually hearing what they're saying. Like Greta Thunberg, like they stopped putting Greta Thunberg on magazines and everything the second she started saying things like free Palestine and decolonization and land
Yeah.
back. And, the more like radical she became. And so there's barriers with that where they like want you to be basically like a perfect minority, but in the sense of, you know, or a model minority, but in the sense of like a model activist. They don't, and so just having to, you know, overcome that fear of, I guess not necessarily a fear, but just overcoming expectations and knowing that,
Yeah.
yeah, and that people will expect things from you. And if you know that's not you, then stay true to yourself, stay true to your beliefs, and don't let the outside world, you know, pressure you. I one of my favorite quotes is actually from Captain America, the Winter Soldier, or Captain America Civil War. And it's where they say that Peggy Carter was like, when asked, like, when do you know to compromise and when do you know to not? And she said, you know, compromise where you can, but where you can't, it's your job to plant yourself like a tree and look them in the eye and say, no, you move. And so it's just kind of, you know, just you have an internal compass and you know it best. And so just listening to that, and you know, once you listen to that and can follow that, it'll be pretty you'll learn how to overcome those challenges if that way.
Yeah. Being connected is really important, whether it's like with other people or nature or even like yourself, to be like to connect with yourself. And then to wrap it up, our last question is, what efforts do the panelists think are most effective for addressing environmental justice and supporting Indigenous communities?
Use your voice, especially, you know, what we're seeing right now in Palestine and calling for the ceasefire, and just the power of even just like posting on your social media, even though that seems little and, you know, it could even feel performative to some people, that really does help a lot. You know, you are not only just sharing with your community, but even just interacting with the post alters the social media algorithm, and it pushes it, and it pushes it up people's timeline, and it, sorry, my social media manager brain. And so just, I really do think social media is one of the most important tools that this generation has. And so just, you know, just using your voice, even, you know, on social media, or pressuring your representatives, because I mean, you can tell by, you know, these calls for the ceasefire in Palestine and all these marches and everything, this using of our voice, it's pressuring these politicians, and they're finally saying like, okay, I'll call, like, they have no choice but to listen. So basically, use your voice. And if you're in a situation where maybe your voice isn't, you know, if you're non-native and it isn't, you know, you don't feel comfortable sharing your voice, empower native voices, empower those voices who are already speaking on this. And so just, yeah, just always talk about it, always share it. Figure out if there's any specific actions happening in your area that Indigenous communities are calling for. If you live in Minnesota, there is absolutely pipelines that you should look into and support Indigenous communities fighting them, and share and tell everybody in your community what's happening. And it's just amplifying the voices and amplifying the movement. And that does so much more than I think people realize.
Mm. Okay, so thank you for sharing. So one goal for PM Ready is to nurture the next generation of project contributors. According to a report from the Project Management Institute, by 2030, the world needs about 25 million, 25 million new project management employees. Youth are tomorrow's project leaders. I would like to invite any adult professionals who are joining us today or listening to the event recording to share your project insights or leadership development insights with our youth. So thank you so much, Leela, for joining us today, and for your openness in sharing your life and leadership journey. I would like to invite you all to join our 2 upcoming virtual events in December. The first one is a virtual workshop on building a standout LinkedIn profile on December 16th, and our info session on December 19th. In the info session, we will introduce who we are at PM Ready, recognize our 2023 volunteer speakers, preview our events and speakers in 2024, and announce the youth mentorship program in which we connect a student with a certified project management professional or a highly experienced product expert. Please use the short link or barcode to register for any of these events. Thank you all, and Leela for joining us this evening.
Thank you.